Get a red book. Turn to page number 79. Let's all stand. Page 79 in the red book. Alas, and did my Savior bleed, and did my sovereign die? Would he devote that sacred head for such a worm as I? At the cross, where I first saw light, and the burden of my heart rolled away. It was there by faith I received my sight, and now I am happy all the day. Was it for crimes that I have done, He rolled upon the tree? Amazing pity, grace enough, and love beyond degree. At the cross, where I first saw the light, and the burden of my heart rolled away. It was there by faith I received my sight, and now I am happy all the day. Will Mike the sun in darkness light, and shut his glories in? When Christ the mighty Maker died, for man the creature sin. At the cross, where I first saw light, and the burden of my heart rolled away. It was there by faith I received my sight, and now I am happy all the day. But drops of grief and every pain, the debt of love I owe. Dear Lord, I give myself away. 'Tis all that I can do. At the cross, where I first saw the light, and the burden of my heart rolled away. It was there by faith I received my sight, and now I am happy all the day. Brother Jim, can you do some prayer, please?
Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, we just pray for the time now to hear your word. Lord, we just pray for all those who are here tonight. Just pray that you give us the words that you'd have us to hear, that we may take it out the rest of this week and be a light for you. Just pray that you be with all those who are sick and couldn't be here. Strengthen them and heal their bodies. Pray for all those who've lost loved ones. Pray for this country. Pray for our president and all our leaders that they'll lead in the way that is pleasing to you. And we just praise you for all your many blessings. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. You may be seated. Let's turn to page 97. Page number 97. On Jordan's stormy banks I stand and cast a wishful eye to Canaan's fair and happy land, where my possessions lie. I am bound for the promised land. I am bound for the promised land. Oh, who will come and go with be forever blessed. When shall I see my Father's face and in his bosom rest? I am bound for the promised land. I am bound for the promised land. Oh, who will come and go with me? I am bound for the promised land. Any prayer requests tonight?
Remember Brother Ken Hughes, he is on his way up to see his dad.
Brother Hughes.
Good friend of mine, Donnie Moss, just had a massive heart attack. He had recovered. He was 100% locked up. And a good friend of mine that I used to work with, his mom just finally lost her battle with cancer. So keep him in prayer.
Yes, sir. Remember these requests. Any others? Jim?
A good friend of mine's wife has passed away from cancer. And then another buddy of mine messaged me on the way here about a little boy named Charlie. He has cancer in his shoulder. I guess he's 11, and his little brother's already has cancer. So he's for that prayer for that family too. Just so many that have cancer.
Yes. Remember these. Miss Amanda?
I have 2 unspoken, and if you guys can remember Joanne, she went for her last chemo treatment today.
This morning. Remember these. Jim?
And Lori Ryan.
Any others?
I don't know.
Yes, ma'am. Remember these. Any others? Well, Dustin?
I have a prayer report. My boss, Robbie, his daughter, I told you guys about, 12-year-old Addison, had cancer of the kidney. She went to the doctor today, and it has decreased by 4 centimeters. Her kidney is now functioning at 15%. And I think there was one other thing. What was the other thing? I can't remember exactly what it was, but she's doing good, very good, and they're praising the Lord for it. And they're thanking you guys for the prayer. So I just thank you guys as well. Ask that you continue to pray.
Yes, sir. Remember this.
And he was here on Sunday.
Yeah. She was in the hospital, matter of fact, dealing with this homecoming morning, and he ain't here.
Remember this. Any others? If not, Brother David, can you pray for these requests, please?
Our precious Heavenly Father, we thank you for your many blessings, healing, things that you do for us. We ask that you touch each and every prayer request, you know each circumstance. Heal these folks' bodies, give them support, help them mentally to take on the challenge, and just, Lord, we just pray for them. You heal them. Lord, we ask that you just be with the rest of the service. We ask these things in Jesus' name.
Amen. Let's turn to page 44. Page number 44. I am thine, O Lord, I have heard thy voice, and it told thy love to me. But I long to rise in the arms of faith, and be closer drawn to thee. Draw me nearer, nearer, blessed Lord, to the cross where thou hast died.
specials tonight? Let's turn to page 400. Page number 400. Down at the cross where my Savior died, down where for cleansing from sin I cried, there to my heart was the blood applied. Glory to His name, glory to His name, glory to His name. There to my heart was the blood applied. Glory to His name. I am so wondrously saved from sin. Jesus so sweetly abides within. There at the cross where He took me in. Glory to His name. Glory to His name. Glory to His name. There to my heart was the blood applied. Glory to His name. Oh, precious fountain that saves from sin. I am so glad I have entered in. There Jesus saves me and keeps me clean. Glory to His name. Glory to His name. Glory to His name. There to my heart was the blood applied. Glory to His name. Come to this fountain so rich and sweet. Cast out your soul at the Savior's feet. Plunge in today and be made complete. Glory to His name. Glory to His name. Glory to His name. There to my heart was the blood applied. Glory to His name.
All right, just as a reminder, this coming Sunday morning, Saturday night, you need to turn your clocks back. All right, so you could fall backwards, and don't fall backwards literally. Just move your clocks back an hour, and then you will be on time. I thought I was kind of hopeful that maybe they would stop that and quit doing that, but they are going to continue to do it again and again. We hope for some change that is good, and we hope for other things that don't change that we would rather keep the same. All right. Tonight we're going to start off in the book of Proverbs. Proverbs. If you've never read through the book of Proverbs and looked at the practical application of the principles of God, that's really what Proverbs is. It's a practical application of the Word of God in our lives, in our everyday lives. And it brings to light some things. It'll make people that are not normally wise, if you'll heed to them, it'll make you appear wise to people. So if you need a little bit of appearance, step up, go to the book of Proverbs. It'll help. Y'all don't have to laugh, just sit there. All right. In our church covenant, we're going to be going into the next part, which is to avoid all tattling, backbiting, and excessive anger. Just going to deal with those three things tonight. Tattling, backbiting, and excessive anger. Woo, y'all ready? Sounds like a good subject to me, doesn't it? I will also give a little plug in that this is the Baptist Anchor. We have a few on the wall in the little cubbyhole thing there to put them there all the time. In particular, when you first open it up, good citizens. Brother Tommy Burris, the president of the Emmaus Baptist College, he wrote this article. He puts an article in there every time, and he wrote this article. An excellent article written at a timely event of the things that are going on in our world and how people are reacting. We do have liberty in Christ, but don't use our liberty maliciously. And he addresses how it is being used maliciously and so forth. Just an excellent article in there, although there's several other articles that are quite good in there as well. I'll read you the title of that. First one was Good Citizens, and then Brother Jim Harris puts another article in here. Another one is extremely, if you like anything to do with American history, you are going to love this article. It has the document of freedom. The document of freedom. If you do not have one of those and would like to have one, you can certainly pick it up back there. If you want to go on the computer, you can also look up that online. Having said that, the Bible was used by the framers of our Constitution. The Bible was used by those pilgrims and Puritans that left the tyranny of the Church of England and the oppression of Catholicism and the papacy over them to conform to a government-recognized religion, and they sought for a place that they could go and worship God freely. Now, that is a summary of how America really got its roots. There's a whole lot of other things involved in that. There are some people who do not think that we ought to have that Christians ought not to have any allegiance to a country, and they should not have any place in politics. According to the Word of God, countries have rose and fell by Christians not taking part in their government or taking part in it. So if we take part in it and we vote properly, by the way, we got just a few more days. Just a few more days, and the polls will be closed. On Tuesday at midnight, they're supposed to close, I think it is, and so all the votes will be in, and they will be counting them up and finding out who our president is. And there's some other elections going on too, and some amendments and things like that. But the privilege to vote, let's don't take it for granted. We still have an opportunity to do this. There are some countries where they do allow people to vote. Certain ones can vote, but the vote really doesn't matter like it does here. And so I'm thankful for that and thankful for that privilege. Now, we have a lot of privileges and a lot of freedoms. And we have the freedom of speech in the United States of America. Amen? I'm setting y'all up. Y'all know that, don't you? We have the freedom of speech. And we have the opportunity to do good with our tongue or to do evil with our tongue. The book of James, we'll look at a little bit later probably if we'll get there, where it says that God said that with your mouth, with your tongue, you bless God and you curse man. He said that ought not to be.
He said, a well does not give forth sweet water and bitter water at the same time. And he said, so our tongue should not be, these things should not be so. Now, this tattling, the term is used in the church covenant and says tattling, avoid all tattling. This goes along with in Proverbs chapter, did I tell y'all chapter 18? Well, now I've told you. Proverbs chapter number 18. We could read the entire chapter and it would be pertinent to what we're looking at here. But I'll just jump in here and say in verse number 7, we'll start reading there. It said, a fool's mouth is his destruction, and his lips are the snare of his soul. The words of a talebearer are as wounds, and they go down into the innermost parts of the belly. He also that is slothful in his work, his brother to him that is a great waster. In verse number 8, it says, the words of a talebearer are as wounds. The thing about carrying tales or tattling and going on, and he says that, listen, he said they are as deep wounds. In another passage, it gives an emphasis about the depth of a wound. It's a wound, and sometimes it's an incurable wound, one that will not heal. But he said what happens is that whenever it's told, a talebearer goes out there and can tell a story and have compassion about it. Whenever they're trying to do something malicious to somebody else, they come out there and they're telling, maybe let's just take that, just put yourself in the position of the talebearer is telling you something about somebody else, and boy, I mean, they're just putting it on. They're telling you like, oh man, this is just breaking my heart to tell you this. And really what they're doing is they're probably embellishing what was told to them in the first place. And the other thing is they're leaving out important data that you would need to come to a proper conclusion. So then they are leading you to believe a lie. But they will pour it on like, oh, this is just tearing me up to tell you just how rotten this other person is. And just what they've done. And let me just start out, back up and start out. When somebody comes to you and they have a burden and they're coming to you, whether they're seeking counsel or whether they're just seeking a comforting friend, and they tell you something in secret, it is not for you to blab a word to anybody. Now, when they come to you and they're telling you about somebody else's trouble, and they say, now listen, I ain't supposed to tell nobody. They told me not to tell anybody, but I think I can tell you. Stop them right there and say, whoa, wait a minute. If they confided in you, then you keep it. I knew a lady many years ago, and she used to tell everybody at the church, said, listen, she said, I cannot keep a secret. Don't tell me. I am weak in that. I can't do it, so don't tell me. So if you know that you're weak in it, you tell them right off the bat, wait a minute, don't tell me nothing that you don't want told, because I just can't keep it to myself. I mean, it's good to acknowledge that, but it's better to control your tongue. It's good to come back and ask forgiveness, but it's better not to do it. So whenever they come to you and they may be seeking counsel, or they may be seeking some comfort from as a friend or a confidant or a loved one, maybe a family member, and then you have that, and you have that in there, then when you begin to tell it, you're probably, number one, you're probably not going to be able to remember exactly how they told it, and so you're going to put it in your own words, right? We do that. We put it in our own words. We're very likely, even with the best intent, we're very likely to mess it up. So it's better just not to tell it at all. And talking about the secret things. But here's what happens, is some of them are so good about telling these stories, and they're so good about convincing you that they really care about that person, that the people that are receiving it, and be careful not to be this person either, that will receive a tale and just bring it in and just suck it down like it's like, oh man, I'm getting ready for me some pecan pie. It's about that time of year, right? We got pecans now. All we need is the rest of the stuff and put it together. And when you get that first bite, that first time, whenever you're so excited about it, and you first see it, and you first smell that pie cooking and everything, that first piece, it seems like, where did it go? It's like, bring it down quick. And it goes down to the bed. He said, what happens a lot of times is the people that are being told these things are ready to receive these things. They bring them down in there, and then they go into the belly, and they sink in there, and they rot. And now that person has got a burden. So if you're going to tell or carry a tale to somebody else, then now you're creating a burden on them as well, whenever they receive it down. So we need to be careful not to receive everything we hear. Not to take that. So he said to avoid these things, avoid this business of tattling and tale-bearing and so forth. Matter of fact, if you used to go in the book of Leviticus, you could read over there where it says, I'll get back to it. He said, thou shalt not go up and down as a talebearer among thy people. This was actually in the law, and they were forbidden to go up and down and telling people and carrying tales and things like that. You know what a wise man does? He conceals the matter. You say, well, preacher, if wrongdoing is being, I'm not talking about whenever somebody's doing somebody else wrong and it needs to be stopped. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is taking things that you might know a little bit about, and so you'll carry a portion of the truth, wrap it around with an embellished story to go along with it, which becomes a cheap lie. And a talebearer is actually a sorry employment. That's a sorry employment to be employed to. Now, go with me to 1 Timothy chapter number 5. 1 Timothy chapter number 5. Begin reading in verse number 11. Every time I go here and read this, in pointing out a lesson like this, there's going to be those that say, oh, he's just a male chauvinist. No, I'm just reading to you the scriptures. It said, but the younger widows refuse, for when they have begun to wax wanton against Christ, they will marry, having damnation, because they have cast off their first faith. And withal, they learn to be idle, wandering about from house to house, and not only idle, but tattlers also, and busybodies, speaking things which they ought not. I will therefore that the younger women marry. See, marrying is a busy business. Keep them occupied. Bear children. Guide the house. Give none occasion to the adversary to speak reproachfully. For some are already turned aside after Satan. That's pretty strong language, isn't it? Now, I have read several different writers, and there's only a couple of them that were brazen enough to write it down like they thought it. And what they said was, it seems like that idle women are more apt to be talebearers. And I'm like, I know a lot of men that are pretty good at it. And I think it's not the gender so much as it is the idleness. The idleness keeps us to where we sit around and we ponder on these things, and we get a little story over here, and we just brew on it and brew on it, and the next thing you know, we can't help it. It's on our mind so much that it just comes out of our mouth. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So we've got to guard ourselves against that type of thing. And he says in here in the church covenant as well as in the scriptures, it tells us there that we should avoid these things. That's a very mild terminology compared to what we find in the book of James, which we will go to shortly. So in the tale-bearing, Proverbs 26, and some of these scriptures we've already read before whenever it comes to the manner our life and so forth like that, how we are to live and so forth. But in Proverbs chapter 26, we'll read that again, a couple verses. 21 and, or actually 20 through 22. So Proverbs 26 verse 20 through 22. He said, where no wood is, there the fire goeth out. So where there is no talebearer, the strife ceaseth. As coals are to burning coals, and wood to fire, so is a contentious man to kindle strife. The words of a talebearer are as wounds, and they go down into the innermost part of the belly. Does that verse sound familiar? We just read it in another place. It's actually in two more places in the scriptures. So it's important that we get this. That the words, they go down into the belly, and it's a deep wound, and it sits there and it brews. So if we're idle, Mama used to say this, that an idle mind is the devil's workshop. And she said, an idle mind usually has idle hands. So if I can keep your hands busy, possibly your mind will be. Did your parents, do they try to keep you busy doing things? I know now we have all kinds of things to draw our attention. Kids especially, they've got all kinds of technology. Whenever I was coming up, and I'm not old, but I just grew up with old parents. I did. My mom was old. She was like my grandma. She was old whenever I was young. But she had some principles and so, and not only that, but whenever you grow up and you don't have a whole lot. They ain't no extra money anytime. And I'm not giving you a sad story. Don't feel sorry for me. I had a wonderful childhood. I had a great childhood. It was full of trouble. It was full of pain. It was full of sorrow. But it was also full of me being in the woods all the time away from people. And I enjoyed it. I hunted, I fished, could get on a horse, go out, do this, that, and other. People would pick me up and take me, and we'd go do things, and older people. I was around old people all my life. Nevertheless, what I was going to say is that entertainment. There was you had to find something entertaining. You got a stick, and you'd go along and you hit the tops of the weeds, those little I can't remember the name of them, but anyhow the little fuzzy things, that when you hit them and they go whoo, and then your grandpa would get after you because you just spread them weed seeds everywhere. But it was fun. Catching lizards or whatever, or trying to trap something, you spend hours and hours and hours trying to do that, to occupy your mind. And what happened is that now there is still an occupation to the mind. It is. But it has taken a little bit of a shift, and technology has been taking the place of creativity. And so now it's created for them. And you kids know exactly what. Don't y'all look at me like that. I know y'all. Y'all done told me some of them video games. Y'all done told me some of that stuff on YouTube. What's that dude's name on YouTube? You ain't going to say it, are you? Don't. But anyhow, there's a lot of things to occupy our time. And what it says is that how we occupy our time and fill our minds, what we're doing is we're bringing in things that eventually are going to come out. because they're going to change the way we think. There's going to be things that we will see. Little Kelly came over the other day. Miss Foster came, and Kelly came to visit, and I brought her in and showed her the wall in there, and she had to write her name on one of them and stick it on there. But anyhow, she was talking, and she made a comment, something about that her mama was teaching her, and that was whenever you play these games, and she was talking about games, and her mama asked her, says, now, are those appropriate? And, of course, Kelly had to go through and give some answers and so forth, and make sure that they were appropriate, and they were. And what she said was, Kelly said this, she said, Mama told me to make sure that I don't become the game. That I'm not in the game, and the game is not in me, it's just a game. And I was like, that's good advice. That's really good advice, but it's hard to do when we encompass ourselves in those things. Now, you say, well, preacher, I'm old. I don't know nothing about no video games. I wouldn't even know how to turn one on, and probably so. But at the same time, what are we occupying our minds with? Hey, some of the old ones are just occupying their time with the news. I mean, some people have the news on 24/7, and that's all they do is watch the news. And some of them are like, well, I don't like that fake news on that channel, so I watch this channel over here, and I don't like that one, I like this one over here, and I like this one. And it's all a preference. Most of it, we don't know whether it's true or not. But we're occupying our minds with something. Be careful that when we occupy our minds with things, that our tongue does not begin to reflect what we've been seeing and watching and hearing. We're in the world, but we're not of the world. We got to be around it. I know, hey, I've heard people say, oh, preacher, the reason I got foul language is because I've worked in construction all my life, and you just don't know how bad it is. Listen, I worked in construction too. As a young preacher, I worked in construction with some roughneck people, but what I found is some of the roughest ones, some of the most foul talking, whenever they found out, they could see in your life the way you conducted yourself, and they found out that you were a Christian, they would show respect. I found that to be true. I mean, I grew up around some redneck, country, tough, aggravating, stinking people. And I was one of them. All right, we got to go. In Proverbs chapter 20, over there, a talebearer revealeth secrets. Therefore meddle not with him that flattereth with his lips. A talebearer uttereth secrets. And what was it? Robin Clayton had mentioned it a couple times, and I keyed on it and said that whispering was not made for compliments. So whenever people are around and they're going, the Bible talks about that. Talks about that whispering, that secret thing, and it generates strife. And matter of fact, I'll give y'all an example. When there ain't nothing going wrong and there ain't no problems at all, and I mean everybody's doing fine, and all of a sudden somebody that your friend, you come in there and you see somebody that normally would be talking to you, but now they're over talking to somebody else, and they're kind of over by themselves, and they don't have to be whispering. They can just be talking. What happens is sometimes we look over here and say, well, what are they talking about me about? You see, sometimes it's not the other person's problem, it's ours. Like, I bet they're over there saying something about this or that and another. Listen, if you got a problem, if you got an error, go make it right. And so that you got a clear conscience, that way when somebody else is over there and they're huddled up and they're talking, if they are talking about you, then they're doing it wrong because you have a clear heart toward it, and keep that way always. And don't be part of the huddle that is gathering around whispering and talking about the other ones. Backbiting is going to be the next thing we get into, and that is slandering somebody and lying really behind their back. And you know what's worse is a backbiter. The terrible thing about that is they're like a dog that can sit there and wag their tail and look at you, and as soon as you turn away, they bite you. It's like, that's right. Put a bullet in his head. Send me to little doggy heaven. Say, oh, preacher, we can't do that. Have done it. James. We're getting over there. The book of James. Chapter number 3. Now, we just read in the Proverbs where that a fire that you don't put no wood in, you take the wood away, it goes out. If it don't have no fuel, it goes away. And he says that whenever you take the talebearer out of the equation, say ain't nobody there to carry it, then the strife will cease. Now listen here. It says James chapter number 3, and we're going to be reading 5 and 6. He said, even so the tongue is a little member, and boasteth great things. Behold how great a matter a little fire kindleth. Them fires out in California didn't start big. Somebody said one in particular, matter of fact, they were trying to bring charges up on the individual. One of them in particular was that they had actually, the old thing about the cigarette, flip a cigarette, and actually that's how it started. So it didn't even start with a flame. Verse number 6. And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity. So is the tongue among our members, that it defileth the whole body. You remember the scriptures that says, that which goeth in the mouth defileth not the man, but that which cometh out of the mouth defileth the man. Here he says that the tongue has the ability, the authority, and the power to defile the whole body. And setteth on fire the course of nature, and it is set on fire of hell. He goes on to talk about that every kind of beast has been tamed, but the tongue no man can tame. Bible talks about the life and death is in the tongue. That the words we speak, we speak these words, that every word that is uttered out of our mouth, that goes across our tongue, across those vocal cords, through our lips, and out into the air, that every word that we're going to be brought into judgment on. Now, knowing that, it should give us an encouragement to be very careful about what we speak, how we talk about other people. I know that sometimes, let me put it this way, sometimes it's not our place to spread the news. If you'll just leave a fool alone, he'll do it himself. Many times, if you'll listen more than you talk, then some people you'll be able to hear and see right in their voice whether they're telling you the truth or whether they're trying to stir up something. Are there malicious people like that in the church? Yes, that's probably why they wrote that. Yeah, they've been in church work a lot. It's why it's in the Word of God. It is because that it is a problem. It is new. We can't turn our backs on it and say that that's not an issue, preacher. We got the freedom of speech. We can say whatever we want to. We got liberty to do this and liberty to do that. Let me tell you something. We don't have liberty, or let me put it like this. And Brother Tommy, in that article, whenever he wrote that, you'll see where he puts it a very educated way. But my simplicity is that when does one man's rights stop? That is whenever his rights invade another man's rights. So our rights that we have, we don't have the right to invade another man's rights. Our rights only give us liberty as long as we can be in the same harmony with our other brethren. But when we demand rights that give us authority or privilege over somebody else, that's when our rights should stop. There's a limit. There's a limit to where we go. Backbiting, I didn't get to backbiting, and I'm out of time. But in the book of Exodus, it tells us over in Exodus chapter 20, verse number 16. Now, that's where the 10 Commandments are given. He said, "Thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor." I mean, that's pretty simple, isn't it? Quit lying about your neighbor. Quit telling more than you know, is what he says. He said, avoid that kind of stuff. That stirs up strife. That stirs up division in the church. That causes problems in family. That causes problems in a relationship. That causes problems on the job. Just because you know something don't mean that it's given to you to tell everybody. Matter of fact, some things, there was I think it was Lori's daddy telling me about this. It was a story about the character of people. And he said what it was, that there was this interview. I guess he had seen it on a television program or something. And this guy had set up an interview for a job. It was a inside office type job anyway. And he had sent out, and they had several people that was going to come in for the interview. And what he instructed the receptionist to do was, he said, every one of them, when they come in, he said, we've scheduled these appointments with 10 minutes that they will have to sit. I want them sitting in the lobby for 10 minutes before we let them come back. And he said what he instructed also, he said, go in there, he said, and just go in there and put stuff around. And what it was is each one of them that came in, he observed them on a camera. And whenever they came in, and they went straight to the reception desk, and the receptionist says, you'll have to wait. It'll be a little while yet. Please have a seat. And the ones that would go in, and he watched them. And he said this one came in there, and he sat down, and he kind of slouched down and kind of looked around and had, picked up a magazine and kind of thumbed through it and threw it back down there on the table and all. And the next one came in, and he didn't slouch down. He sat up right and all, and he crossed his legs properly. He had some posture about him and so forth. But he looked around and saw the things in the office and everything, and he just passed it on by. But this one guy came in, and he said he was a young guy. He came in, and he observed him, and he was well-groomed, well-dressed, and he came in, and whenever the reception told him to sit there, have a seat, and I'll call you whenever time, he said what happened was he went over there, and he sat down, and he looked around, and there was a piece of trash on the floor, and he picked the piece of trash up, and he looked around, found a garbage can, he put it in there. He went over there to the table where the books were. He was looking through them magazines, but as he was doing that, he was stacking them up nice and neat, and he just kind of straightened things up right around where he was at there. He just took the initiative to do that. And whenever he got done with his magazine, he made sure he placed it just right and all. And the difference was that he took an initiative about his own person and about his environment to make his environment better. And he said, that's the kind of guy I want working for me. Is the kind that don't have to be told, the kind that don't look around and say, well, that ain't my job. The kind that don't, listen, the information was there. It was provided for him. He looked and he saw there was a need, and he could provide that need. Let me tell you, that's what we ought to occupy ourselves with, is what God gives us, the visual to know what the need is, and sometimes we don't have to be told. Listen, if you go in there in the bathroom and the toilet's overflowing, you don't have to be told to stop it. Right? If you got a weak stomach and baby rooster's coming out, you might want to call somebody. But you got to get it stopped. You can't just walk out and say, well, that ain't my problem. That was not needed, was it? And then the ones that go around and they begin to backbite somebody else, and they'll tear their character down and so forth. And then we're going to get also to the excessive anger. That's where I wanted to get to, because that's the last thing we're going to be dealing with tonight. So we're going to go to excessive anger and look at a little bit of that and see why. It's not wrong to be angry, by the way. It's not wrong to be angry. But when we cannot control our tongue, our anger reaches a point that it cannot be controlled and it comes out. That's when we sin. That's when sin is committed. The anger, we can have righteous anger about sin. I mean, we ought to be angry with the sin and the ungodliness and the filth that's going on. And listen, let me tell you something. If somebody broke into my house in the middle of the night and they interrupt my sleeping and they come in, I mean, when I finally do get to sleep, and they come in, they break in there, I'm not going to be gentle with that individual. And I am going to be very angry with that individual. And I'm going to act out on it. That's not what he's talking about here. He's not talking about in that moment of defense where you're having to secure a situation. He's not talking about that. What he's talking about is whenever we get puffed up in ourselves, and we get angry with somebody else, and they might be doing wrong, but now how do we respond to it can make it worse. How we respond to it can make it much, much worse. In Colossians chapter number 3, and verse number 8, we can read there where it says, "But now ye also put off all these, anger, wrath, malice, blasphemy, filthy communication out of your mouth." And don't worry about going there. You might want to write these down because I'm fixing to speed read. And it said, Ephesians 4 and 31 reads and says, he said, "Let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice." Now, whenever we look at the book of James, he declares over there in chapter number 1 and verse number 20, he said, "For the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God." For the wrath of man worketh not the righteousness of God. When we act out on it, we're trying to be God's disciplinary person. I mean, we want to be the one to take it. We want to be the one to bring vengeance upon somebody else, even if it ain't for us. If it's somebody else, it's still wrong. Now, are we going to stop and help somebody? I mean, if somebody's being, if some goofball is beating up on an old woman walking into Walmart and I'm there, yeah, I'm going to stop and I'm going to intervene, and try to stop this thing. Just be careful when you do that because a lot of times you'll get into the middle of a domestic dispute and both of them will be against you. Ephesians chapter 4. You can go there, this one. Ephesians chapter number 4. Now these are things that we ought to have or put away out of our lives or have in our lives. Verse number 25, it says, "Wherefore, putting away lying, speak every man truth with his neighbor, for we are members one of another." He said, "Be ye angry and sin not. Let not the sun go down upon your wrath, neither give place to the devil." So he says to be ye angry and sin not. It's not, as I've said before, it's not bad to get angry whenever somebody does something bad to you. Or whenever somebody's doing something bad to somebody else. The anger is not the problem. The problem is the reaction. How are we going to react to that? Now, I need to read that last part there again. He said, "Let not the sun, S-U-N, go down upon your wrath." So when we are going to let them know how they have angered us. My mama's in heaven, so I can talk about her a little bit. But what she used to say, she said, when she'd get real angry with us kids, and she'd say, "I love you, but I sure don't like you a whole lot right now." That was illustrating that she was extremely disappointed, angry. Mama didn't use the word disappointed a whole lot. She said, "You made me mad." And thankfully, most of the time, Mama had control. There was a few times whenever whatever was convenient, that's what she used to express her anger on your hind end with. But for the most part, and she told me whenever We had children. She said, Rodney, she said, there's one thing that I want you to take in a note. Said, when with these kids, she said, when they do something wrong, whenever they disobey you and they go against you, and they're going to try you. When they do that, she said, please do not whip them in the heat of your anger. She said, for danger of going too far. And I was like, why didn't your mama tell you that? But it was really good advice. And it's also good advice that when somebody approaches you and causes you anger, it's a good thing to just give it a moment. Give it a moment before you retaliate, before you try to correct this thing. Because a lot of times we go back to the Proverbs and it reads, how a soft answer turneth away wrath. So a lot of times if we'll just hold on a minute. So quit the tattling if you're doing it. Don't do it. Don't carry a tale. Don't tell more than you know. Don't even tell what you know sometimes. By all means, don't lie about people to their back. Things that you would not say to their face. Don't lie about it to their back to try to tear them down. Because with what you do to others will be turned around to you one day. And it won't feel very good. And when you're angry, and you have a right to be angry, be careful. Don't let the sun go down upon your eye. Don't carry it from day to day. Don't carry your hatred, your bitterness, your animosity. Don't go to sleep with it and then the next morning wake up and pick it back up again. Maybe what we need to do is when we've had a day like that is let the last thing out of our mouth before we fall asleep be, Lord, give me strength and cause me to wake up in the morning fresh without all this. And if it's still there, Lord, help me to be stronger than it. Don't become the game, and don't let the game become you. Realize God can handle it better than we can. And He can handle other people better than we can. Hey, sometimes I try to give the Lord advice on how to take care of these other people. And the Lord reminds me, you keep it up, and I'm going to point out yours. And then whenever they do receive discipline from God, don't you stand around and gloat at it, lest you anger God and He'll turn away from them and then turn to you. That's biblical. As a church, these are just reasonable responsibilities. Nothing unreasonable about it. Nothing about being some sort of an extraordinary attribute of a Christian. No, these are reasonable characteristics of a child of God. Stand with me. Yes, sir.